What if some of them, even those who smile the widest or claim to care the most, carry invisible toxins in their words, their energy, their very presence? Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who mapped the uncharted territories of the human psyche, identified 6 dangerous archetypes that act as psychological thieves, stealthily robbing you of clarity, confidence, and even your destiny. These aren't obvious predators. They're subtle shapeshifters, the friend who weaponizes your secrets under the guise of honesty, the partner who suffocates your growth while calling it love, the mentor who demands your surrender disguised as devotion. They slip past your defenses because they don't attack. They distort. Like emotional radiation, their damage is invisible until the symptoms appear. That inexplicable exhaustion after conversations, the self-doubt that blooms after their advice, the dreams you quietly abandon to keep their approval. Jung's genius was recognizing these archetypes as mirrors, each reflecting back the unclaimed shadows we haven't yet faced. The more you avoid your own inner work, the more power they hold over you. But here's the liberating truth. Once you learn their hidden signatures, you'll spot them not with fear, but with the quiet mastery of a sage who knows storms by their gathering clouds. Jung's dangerous archetypes are not mere personality types, but living forces, energetic patterns that thrive in the fertile soil of our unconscious vulnerabilities. They emerge from the same psychological undercurrents that shape myths and fairy tales. The tyrant, the seducer, the eternal child, the martyr, the trickster, and the shadow saint. Each represents a perversion of something sacred. Love twisted into control, wisdom warped into manipulation, innocence devolved into helplessness. What makes them truly perilous is their ability to cloak themselves in familiarity, disguising their toxicity as normalcy until we forget we ever had a choice in accepting them. The first thread running through these archetypes is their mastery of projection. Like master sculptors, they mold our perceptions until we mistake their reality for our own. The gaslighter who convinces you your intuition is paranoia. The emotional vampire who frames their neediness as your inadequacy. These are artists of psychological alchemy, turning your gold into their lead. They operate through a devastating formula. First, they create dependency, emotional, financial, or spiritual. Then they weaponize the dependency to keep you from questioning the slow erosion of your boundaries. The tragedy is that we often stay, not because we're blind, but because somewhere deep within, their presence confirms our oldest wounds. The belief that love must hurt, that growth requires suffering, that we are somehow responsible for their unresolved pain. Yet the most potent danger lies in their symbiotic relationship with our shadows. The narcissist finds fertile ground not in the self-assured, but in those who've abandoned their own worth. The manipulator thrives not among the discerning, but near those trained to doubt their own perceptions. This is Jung's profound revelation. We attract not what we want, but what we haven't healed. The people who disrupt our peace are often mirrors reflecting the disowned parts of ourselves we've been too afraid to face. Our repressed anger, our hidden grandiosity, our unacknowledged victimhood. When we label them simply as toxic, we miss the initiatory opportunity they represent. Every encounter with these archetypes is a soul test, revealing exactly where our boundaries need strengthening and where our self-concept needs liberation from old scripts. Mythology whispers truths that psychology later names. Consider the Greek tale of Lamia, the once beautiful queen transformed into a child-devouring demon, not by cruelty, but by unbearable grief after Hera stole her offspring. She became what Jung would call a destroyer in wounded robes, preying on the young to fill her bottomless absence. This is the archetype of the emotional vampire in modern form. The friend who drains your joy not from malice, but from an unhealed hunger, their unmet needs turning them into unconscious predators. They don't see the teeth marks they leave on your spirit because their own pain has blinded them to consequence. The alchemical tradition speaks of the unconscious adept, those who wield psychological forces without awareness, like children playing with fire in a dry forest. The charismatic cult leader who channels genuine spiritual yearning into servitude mirrors the medieval sorcerer's apprentice, invoking powers he cannot control. These modern tricksters don't appear with horns and pitchforks, but in tailored suits or spiritual garb, their manipulation sanctified as enlightened leadership. Their danger lies not in obvious evil, but in their sincere belief that their exploitation is for your highest good. a distortion as old as the serpent convincing Eve that disobedience was enlightenment. Native American traditions tell of skinwalkers, beings who wear others' likenesses like garments. This mirrors Jung's shadow saint, the person who performs virtue so flawlessly that you dismiss your unease as cynicism. Their public kindness and private cruelty create a cognitive dissonance that paralyzes your discernment. Much like the folkloric fairies who offered exquisite gifts with hidden curses, you find yourself making excuses for their behavior, not because the evidence is lacking, but because acknowledging the truth would shatter your faith in the very categories of good and evil. Perhaps most revealing is the Buddhist parable of the hungry ghosts, entities with throats no thicker than needles, forever starving despite their endless consumption. These are the psychological portraits of the perpetual victims and energy drainers in our lives, those who can never be filled because their wounds have reshaped them into vessels with invisible holes. Their presence in your life acts as karmic sandpaper, rubbing raw your savior complex until you either break or awaken to the difficult truth. Some souls must learn to feed themselves before any nourishment can take root. Recognizing these archetypes is only half the alchemical work. The true transformation begins when we develop the subtle arts of energetic self-defense. This starts not with changing others, but with awakening our own perceptual acuity, like learning to sense atmospheric pressure changes before a storm. We can cultivate an inner barometer for these psychological patterns. The narcissist's charm initially feels like sunlight but leaves a metallic aftertaste of depletion. The martyr's complaints provoke not just sympathy but a creeping sense of obligation that tightens around the throat like an invisible noose. These somatic signals are our first line of defense, the body's ancient wisdom sounding alarms before the conscious mind comprehends the threat. In practical terms, this demands what medieval mystics called the discerning of spirits, the ability to distinguish between nourishment and poison in human form. When someone leaves you feeling paradoxically emptier after their generosity, or when your accomplishments are met with backhanded praise that lingers like a bruise, these are the modern equivalents of finding toadstools in what appeared to be a wholesome meal. Corporate environments provide fertile ground for these dynamics. The manager who pathologizes healthy ambition as disloyalty, the colleague who weaponizes teamwork to disguise their own incompetence. Spiritual communities face particular vulnerability to the shadow saint, the guru whose demands for absolute surrender mask a hunger for control as old as the pyramids. The most potent protection lies in what Jung called shadow integration, not just avoiding these archetypes, but recognizing their seeds within ourselves. When we acknowledge our own capacity for manipulation, our latent victimhood, our hunger for unhealthy dominance, we drain their power over us. This is why journaling after encounters with these personalities proves revelatory. Tracing why certain barbs stick while others glance off reveals our hidden vulnerabilities. Those who trigger disproportionate reactions in us are often pointing to unhealed territories within our own psyche. The journey through Jung's dangerous archetypes ultimately leads not to paranoia, but to profound empowerment. These challenging relationships serve as the grit in the oyster of consciousness, irritants that, when worked with awareness, produce the pearl of discernment. Each encounter with these patterns, whether in lovers, friends, or public figures, offers a masterclass in boundary alchemy. Learning to say no without guilt, to walk away without apology, to protect your energy without explanation. This is the initiation these shadow figures unwittingly offer. The chance to graduate from seeing people as saviors or villains, and instead recognize them as mirrors and teachers. The narcissist shows you where you've abandoned self-worth. The emotional vampire reveals your addiction to being needed. The spiritual bypasser reflects your own avoided pain. When you stop fighting these reflections and start learning from them, you reclaim the power they've been holding for you. The final revelation is this: the most dangerous person you'll ever meet isn't on Jung's list, because it's the version of yourself that still believes you need these relationships to survive your own unresolved wounds. That's the true shapeshifter to outgrow, and in that reckoning lies your liberation.